He gave 10 years of his life for a promise. The young man had nothing. Not in the way people casually say it, but truly nothing. No land to stand on. No family waiting for him at the end of the day. No name that anyone cared to remember. He was born into silence and raised by struggle. In a village where people measured worth by what you owned, he was invisible. So when the landlord offered him work, he didn't ask questions. He didn't negotiate. He simply said yes. Because to someone like him, even suffering can look like opportunity. At first, it felt like a beginning. There was always a bowl of rice waiting, a place to sleep beneath a roof, a rhythm to life that felt almost stable. But that feeling didn't last. It never does. The work began before the sun rose, and often ended long after it disappeared. There were no days off, no moments of rest, only orders. Always another task, always something unfinished. He carried water until his shoulders burned. He worked the fields until his hands cracked and bled. He fixed, cleaned, lifted, and endured without ever being seen. Not once did the landlord thank him. Not once did anyone ask if he was tired. Because to them, he wasn't a person. He was a tool. Something to be used until it broke. And yet he stayed. Day after day. Month after month. Year after year. Not because he was strong, but because he believed. Believed in something fragile. Something distant. Something that felt just real enough to hold on to. A promise. It had been said so casually, almost like it meant nothing. If you stay loyal, you will marry my daughter. Just a sentence. Just a few words. But to him, it became everything. Because for the first time in his life, someone had offered him a future. And so he endured the pain. He swallowed the silence. He accepted the suffering. Not because he had to, but because he thought one day it would all be worth it. Time didn't pass the way it does for most people. For the young man, it didn't move forward. It simply repeated itself. The same mornings, the same fields, the same aching in his bones, the same silence that followed him everywhere he went. Days blurred into weeks. Weeks faded into months. And before he even realized it, years had disappeared. 10 years. 10 years of waking up before the sun. 10 years of working until his body could barely stand. 10 years of watching life move around him while he remained exactly where he started. Except now he was older, more tired, more worn down. But still, he held on to that promise. Not tightly, not confidently, but desperately. Like someone holding on to the last piece of something that might still save them. Sometimes late at night, when the work was finally done, he would allow himself to imagine it. A different life. A quieter life. A life where he didn't have to bow his head every time someone called his name. Where his hands weren't always trembling from exhaustion. Where he wasn't just surviving, but living. And in every version of that future, the promise was there, waiting, just within reach. But something had changed. Not all at once. Not suddenly, but slowly, quietly, almost unnoticeably. The landlord stopped mentioning it. At first, it didn't matter. The young man told himself, he's just waiting for the right time. But the right time never came. Years passed, and the silence grew heavier. Until it wasn't just silence anymore. It was avoidance. The way the landlord looked past him. The way conversations ended when he walked in. The way the promise was treated like it had never existed. And deep down, beneath all the hope he had built, something began to crack. Not completely. Not enough to break him, but enough to make him wonder, Had it ever been real? Or had he been living all these years inside a lie? He tried to ignore it, tried to bury the thought, because questioning it meant facing something he wasn't ready to accept. But doubt has a way of growing, quietly, relentlessly, until one day it becomes impossible to ignore. And on that day, for the first time in 10 years, he stopped waiting and decided to ask. He stood there for a long moment, as if the question itself had taken everything out of him. 10 years of waiting, distilled into a single sentence. Do you still remember your promise? The air felt heavier than usual. Even the sounds around them seemed to fade. The landlord did not answer immediately. He simply looked at him, studied him, as if seeing him for the first time not as a worker, but as something else, something inconvenient. Then slowly he smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It wasn't the smile of someone who had been reminded of a promise. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment. You've been working for me a long time, he said, his voice calm. Too calm. The young man nodded. I have done everything you ask. A pause. Not long, but long enough to feel wrong. And now, he continued, I only ask for what you promised. The landlord leaned back slightly. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Something colder, more distant. Of course I remember, he said. And for a brief moment, hope returned. Fragile, dangerous, alive. But the word hung in the air like a blade. If you want my daughter, you must prove that you deserve her. The young man didn't move, didn't speak. He simply waited, because deep down he already knew this was not the answer he had hoped for. What must I do? He asked quietly. The landlord's smile widened, just a little, enough to reveal the truth hiding beneath it. Go into the forest, he said, and bring me a bamboo tree. His voice slowed, careful, measured, with exactly 100 segments. Silence. The words settled between them, heavy, unavoidable. The young man's chest tightened. Not from confusion, but from recognition. Because in that moment, everything became clear. This was never a test. It was an ending, a way out, for the landlord, not for him. The promise had never been meant to be fulfilled. It had only been meant to keep him working, to keep him obedient, to keep him there for 10 long years. And now it was being taken away, replaced by something impossible, something no one could ever achieve, so that when he failed, it wouldn't be the landlord breaking his word. It would be him, for not being good enough, for not being worthy, for not being enough. The young man said nothing, because there was nothing left to say.
No anger, no protest, no argument.
Only silence. A silence that felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. Slowly, he lowered his head and nodded, not because he believed in the task, not because he trusted the man in front of him, but because somewhere deep inside, a small, stubborn part of him still refused to let go, refused to accept that 10 years of his life could mean nothing. So he turned and walked away toward the forest, toward the lie, toward something that had already begun to change him. He left before sunrise. No one stopped him. No one asked where he was going, because in that village, some things didn't need to be said. The forest stood at the edge of the fields, silent, unmoving, like it had always been there waiting. At first, the path felt familiar. He had walked near its edge many times before. The air was cool. The bamboo swayed gently. The ground beneath his feet felt steady, almost welcoming, but the deeper he went, the more that feeling began to fade. The light shifted first, not suddenly but slowly, like something was dimming the world around him. The shadows grew longer, darker, because somewhere deep within that stillness, something shifted. Not loud, not sudden, but enough. Enough to make him realize he was no longer alone. At first, he thought it was the wind, a faint shift in the air, something barely there. But the forest had been silent for too long, too completely, too unnaturally. So when the sound came again, he knew it wasn't the wind, it was something else. Why do you keep searching? The voice was soft.
Low. Close.
Too close. The young man didn't move, didn't breathe, because he couldn't tell where it came from. Not behind him, not in front of him, but everywhere, at once, for something that does not exist. His fingers tightened against the dirt, his body frozen between fear and exhaustion. Slowly, he lifted his head. The bamboo stood around him, unchanged, unmoving, and yet everything felt different. "Who is there?" he whispered. No answer, only silence. And then the voice returned, calmer this time, older. "He sent you here to fail." The words landed quietly, but they carried weight, the kind of weight that sinks deep. The young man swallowed,
his throat dry.
"I know," he said, and for the first time there was no denial in his voice. No hope, just truth. "Then why do you continue?" The question lingered, not demanding, not accusing, just waiting. He didn't answer right away, because the truth was not simple. It wasn't strength. It wasn't determination. It wasn't even belief anymore. It was something else, something harder to name. "I have nothing else," he finally said. "And if I stop now, then all of it meant nothing." The forest seemed to listen, not judging, not reacting, just present. Then slowly, the voice spoke again. "Nothing is ever truly nothing." A pause, long enough to feel intentional. "Take what is broken and make it whole." The young man frowned. The words didn't make sense. Not yet. He looked around, at the bamboo, at the endless repetition of it, at the pieces he had cut, scattered, discarded, forgotten. "Bring them together," the voice whispered. "Not as they were, but as they must become." Something shifted inside him.
Not understanding.
Not fully, but enough. Enough to move. Slowly, he pushed himself up, his legs weak, his body heavy, but his eyes more focused than before. He picked up the axe again, not searching this time, not hoping,
but following.
One cut, then another, each piece deliberate, each movement guided by something he couldn't see or explain. He didn't question it, because in that moment it felt more real than anything else. And as he worked, the silence returned. But it was no longer empty. It was watching, waiting. And for the first time since entering the forest, he wasn't afraid of it, because whatever was there had chosen to speak. And that meant one thing.
He was no longer lost.
He had been found. He didn't know how long he worked.
Time no longer moved the way it used to.
There was no sun to follow, no shadows to measure, only motion, only rhythm, the sound of bamboo being cut again and again and again. Each strike of the axe echoed deeper than it should, as if the forest itself was listening, watching every movement, counting every piece. The young man stopped searching for the perfect tree. He stopped hoping to find something whole. Instead, he began to create it, one segment at a time. He cut carefully now, not out of habit, but with intention, each piece placed beside the other, lined up, measured, counted.
1, 2, 5, 10, 20.
The pile grew, slowly, silently, until the number began to matter. 50, 70, 90. His breathing grew heavier, not from exhaustion, but from something else. Something building, something approaching. 98, 99, 100. He stopped. The forest went still, completely still. No movement, no sound. Not even the weight of his own breath seemed to exist. The pieces of bamboo lay before him,
Separate.
lifeless, just fragments of something that used to belong together. For a moment, nothing happened, and doubt crept in.
Slow.
Cold.
Familiar.
What if this was another lie? What if the voice was nothing more than his mind breaking under pressure? His fingers tightened, his jaw clenched, but he didn't step back, because stepping back meant returning to nothing. Then the memory returned. The words. Simple, unclear, but undeniable. Take what is broken and make it whole. He swallowed, his voice low, barely more than breath. Join. The air shifted, subtle, but real.
Together.
For a heartbeat, nothing. Then everything. The ground trembled beneath him. Not violently, but enough. Enough to tell him something had begun. The bamboo pieces twitched. Just once. Then again. Sharper this time. Faster. They slid across the ground unnaturally, as if pulled by something unseen.
He took a step back.
His heart racing now, because this was no longer something he could understand. The pieces collided, snapping together. Not gently, not carefully, but with force. With urgency. With something that felt almost alive. Segment after segment locked into place. Climbing upward, twisting, aligning, until a single structure stood before him. Tall, complete, unbroken, 100 segments. Exactly. But it wasn't still. It swayed slightly, even though there was no wind. It creaked softly, like something adjusting itself, like something waking up. The young man stared, unable to move, unable to look away, because deep down he knew this was not just a tree. It had never been just a tree, and whatever had helped him create it was still there, still watching, still waiting to see what he would do next. For a long moment he didn't move. The bamboo stood before him, silent, yet not still. It leaned ever so slightly, as if it were aware of him, as if it were waiting. The young man swallowed,
His throat dry.
his mind racing between fear and something else, something sharper, clearer. For the first time in years, he felt in control, not of everything, but of something, and that was enough. Slowly, he stepped forward, reaching out, hesitating only for a second, before touching it. The surface was cold, too cold, not like wood, not like anything natural, but it didn't resist him. It didn't move. It simply existed, as if it had always been there, as if it had always belonged to him. He tightened his grip and began the walk back. The forest did not stop him. It did not whisper again. It did not follow, but he could feel it, behind him, around him, watching, always watching. The path seemed shorter now, Or perhaps he was no longer the same person who had entered. The silence no longer pressed against him. The darkness no longer felt empty, because he carried something with him, something that had changed the rules. By the time he reached the edge of the forest, the sky had shifted. Light returned. Sound returned. The world felt normal again. But he didn't. Villagers saw him first. A few stopped walking. Then more. Whispers spread quickly. Eyes widened. Not because they recognized him, but because of what he carried. A bamboo tree.
Perfect.
Unbroken.
Impossible.
By the time he reached the courtyard, a crowd had already gathered. No one spoke. They only watched, waiting. The landlord stepped forward. At first, there was confusion in his eyes. Then disbelief. Then something else. Something darker. He walked closer. Slowly.
Carefully.
As if approaching something dangerous. "This," he said quietly. "What is this?" The young man said nothing. He simply stood there, holding the bamboo, not like a servant, not like before, but like someone who had returned with something the world did not understand. The landlord circled it,
Studying.
searching for a flaw, a weakness, a reason to deny it, but there was none. Exactly 100 segments. No more, no less.
Perfect.
And that perfection made it terrifying. The silence grew heavy, thicker than before, because everyone felt it. Something was wrong, not with the bamboo, but with what it meant. The landlord straightened, his face hardening, and then he laughed.
Short. Sharp.
Unnatural. A trick, he said. Nothing more. And just like that, everything shifted again. The laughter echoed across the courtyard. Sharp.
Cold. Wrong.
For a moment, no one moved. The villagers looked at one another, uncertain, because deep down they all knew this was no trick. There was something about the bamboo, something they could feel but could not explain. And yet, the landlord kept laughing. "You think you can fool me with this?" He stepped closer, his voice louder now, forcing confidence into every word. "A pile of sticks tied together. That's all this is." The young man didn't respond, didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He simply stood there, still, watching. And that silence began to change the air, because it wasn't the silence of weakness. It was something else, something heavier, something waiting. The landlord's smile faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. Enough for doubt to slip in. Still, he pushed forward. "Get this out of my sight," he snapped. "And don't come back asking for things you don't deserve." The words hung in the air.
Familiar.
Full. Final. The kind of words that once would have broken him. But not anymore. Not now. The young man took a slow breath. Then, for the first time since returning, he spoke.
Softly. Calmly.
"Join." The word barely carried. Almost lost in the open air. But the bamboo heard it. Together. What happened next was not fast, not sudden. It began with a sound, a low, dry, cracking noise. So quiet, most didn't notice it at first, until it grew louder, sharper, closer. The bamboo trembled, just slightly, then again, stronger this time. The landlord stepped back, confusion flashing across his face. "What is?" He didn't finish, because the bamboo moved, not falling, not breaking, but rising, twisting, uncoiling itself with a force that did not belong to anything natural. It shot forward, wrapping around the landlord's leg, then his arm. Then his body.
Tight. Fast.
Unforgiving. He screamed, not in anger, not in command, but in fear. Real fear. The kind he had never known. Let go of me. He struggled.
Pulled.
Kicked. But the more he moved, the tighter it became. The bamboo creaked as it tightened, each segment locking into place, holding him, binding him, like it had been made for this. Servants rushed forward, trying to pull him free, hands grabbing, voices shouting. But the moment they touched the bamboo, it reacted, striking again, wrapping around them, dragging them down, one by one.
Caught.
Held, unable to escape. The courtyard filled with chaos, screams,
Panic.
fear spreading faster than anyone could understand. And in the center of it all, the young man stood still, watching, not with anger, not with rage, but with something quieter, something colder. The landlord's voice broke through the noise. Stop. Stop this. His face twisted in terror, his strength gone, his power meaningless. I'll do it. I'll keep the promise. The words came out desperate, broken, nothing like the man he had been just moments before. The young man said nothing. Not yet, because this time it wasn't about words. It was about truth, and truth takes time to reveal itself. So he waited, just long enough, until the struggle stopped, until the screams faded, until the fear became real. And only then did he speak again. The courtyard had gone silent, not because the danger had passed, but because no one dared to move. The landlord hung there, bound tightly by the bamboo, his breath shallow, his strength gone. For the first time in his life, he was powerless, truly powerless. I'll keep it, he whispered again. This time not as a command, not as a lie, but as something closer to truth. I'll keep my promise. The young man watched him, carefully, quietly, as if weighing something unseen. For 10 years, those words had been everything. Now they meant nothing, unless they were real. He stepped forward slowly, each step measured, deliberate. The bamboo creaked softly, as if reacting to his presence, as if waiting for his decision. He stopped just a few steps away, close enough to see the fear in the landlord's eyes, close enough to understand that this moment would change everything for both of them.
Say it again, he said, his voice calm, steady.
Not loud, but impossible to ignore. The landlord swallowed, his lips trembling. I will give you my daughter. I will keep my word.
A pause.
Then silence. Not the heavy silence of before, but something different, something final. The young man closed his eyes briefly, not out of doubt, but to let go, to release something he had carried for too long. Then he spoke, softly, separate. The bamboo responded instantly, not violently this time, not with force, but with control. It loosened, slowly,
Carefully.
unwinding from the landlord's body, from his arms,
His chest. His legs.
until he dropped to the ground,
Gasping.
shaking.
Free.
The others followed, released one by one, collapsing where they stood. No one spoke, no one moved, because something had shifted, not just in the courtyard, but in the space between people, in the way they looked at the young man, no longer as a servant, no longer as someone beneath them, but as something else, something they did not understand, and perhaps something they feared. The bamboo fell apart,
Piece by piece.
returning to the ground,
silent, still,
as if it had never moved at all. But the memory remained. In every eye, in every breath, in every heartbeat that had nearly stopped. The landlord didn't look at him again.
He couldn't, because the balance had changed.
And there was no going back. The promise was kept. The wedding took place, just as it should have years ago. But even then, something lingered. Something unseen. Something that had followed him out of the forest. Because late at night, when the village had gone quiet, some said they could still hear it.
A faint sound, dry, sharp,
like bamboo shifting in the dark. Not from the wind, not from the earth, but from something else. Something that remembered, something that listened, and something that waited for the next promise to be broken. There's something unsettling about this story. Not the bamboo, not the forest, but the promise. Because the truth is, most promises don't break all at once. They fade, quietly, slowly, until one day they're gone, and no one remembers they were ever made. But this story reminds us of something simple, something dangerous, that words have weight, even when we think they don't. Because every promise you make creates something, an expectation, a belief, a future in someone else's mind. And when you break it, you don't just take your words back, you take that future with it. So maybe the real question is not whether the bamboo was real, but whether consequences always are. Even when we don't see them, even when they don't come right away. Because sometimes they wait,
just like the forest,
just like the silence, just like something that never forgets. If you enjoy stories like this, stories that stay with you long after they end, then this is just the beginning. There are many more stories from places you've never seen, with truths you may not expect. So stay with me, and I'll see you in the next story.